Have you ever felt like you're a joke and you're the only one not in on the punchline? That your very name, the one given to you at birth, has become a curse, a brand that marks you for failure and shame? My story begins there, not in some dusty ancient book, but in my own memory, in a land where hope had long since withered and died, and I, ironically, was the one left to scavenge through its remains. This isn't just a story of war, of swords and fire. This is a confession. It's a confession about terror, about the crushing weight of despair, and about a single unbreakable vow I made under a starless sky. A vow that nearly cost me everything I ever loved. I promise you, the end of this story is not what you think it is. It will burrow its way into your soul and ask you a question. Can we truly redefine our destiny, or are we forever prisoners of the promises we make? Before we journey together into the darkest chapter of my life, I want to know where you are in this world. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Just leave a comment below. Let me know that on this journey I'm not entirely alone. Now, let me take you back to the shattered plains. The name wasn't an exaggeration, it was a brutal reality. Picture a vast expanse of earth cracked and blistered under the relentless gaze of an unforgiving sun. The once mighty Aryan River was now a sluggish brown ribbon of water, a long faded scar winding its way through plains so barren they looked skeletal. Our clans, the descendants of a once proud people, were huddled along its banks, fighting over every drop of water, every patch of exhausted soil. We were a people living in the shadow of our own past. But our greatest enemy wasn't the harsh land. Our enemy came from the east, riding on winds of grit and dust. We called them the Sand Reavers. They were nomadic warriors, giants of men with skin like scorched leather and eyes that held the emptiness of the desert. Their weapons weren't just the cruel, curved scimitars they wielded with deadly grace. Their true terror lay in their black iron chariots, pulled by massive, thundering beasts that could crush a man's bones to powder. When they came, the sky would turn a sickly ochre yellow, and the very ground would tremble. They didn't just take our grain and our livestock. They took our dignity. They took our hope. And I was Kael. In the old tongue, my name means fortress, a bitter, cruel irony. I was no fortress, I was a ruin. My father, Chieftain Oren, had once been a great leader, but in the last stand against the Sand Reavers a decade ago, he made a fatal error, a tactical blunder that led to the slaughter of hundreds of our best warriors. He didn't die on the battlefield. He died months later, in his bed, consumed by a quiet, suffocating shame. He left me only one inheritance, his disgrace. No one called me Kael. They called me Oren's Folly, or the traitor's son. When I walked through the marketplace, conversations would die. I could feel the stares like daggers in my back. The old men would turn away, mothers would pull their children closer. I survived by scavenging, by trailing the Sand Reavers' raids, and picking through the debris they left behind. A few bruised potatoes, a torn piece of cloth, a broken tool. It was an existence, not a life. Every evening I would climb a rocky bluff overlooking the eastern wastes. I'd stare out at that endless sea of sand with a feeling that twisted my insides into knots. A deep primal fear and a slow burning ember of hatred that never went out. I hated them. But I also hated our own weakness, the way we had bowed our heads and accepted our fate. In that bleak world, I had one single point of light. My sister, Lyra. 5 years my junior, she had eyes the color of a clear sky after a rainstorm, a sight we rarely saw. She was the only person who looked at me without seeing my father's ghost. She saw only her brother. Every time I'd return with my meager findings, she would smile and say, "You did well today, Kael." Her words were the only cool water in the desert of my life. But because of her, my fear was magnified 1,000 times. I could endure the scorn, but I couldn't endure the thought of the Sand Reaver's brutal hands ever touching her. That thought was like acid eating me from the inside out. Then one night, as a sliver of moon hung over the plains, something happened. I was on my usual bluff, lost in my dark thoughts, when a wind kicked up. It wasn't the usual hot, dry wind. This one was cool, carrying a strange scent, like damp earth. And then I saw it. The sand. It wasn't the dull yellow of the desert. It glowed with a soft, ethereal blue light, like a million tiny fireflies. The wind, as if guided by an unseen hand, swirled the glowing grains into a small vortex right in front of me. They danced for a moment, then settled on the ground, forming a perfect luminous spiral. I was frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. What was it? A trick of the light? A hallucination brought on by hunger? Or a sign? In the old stories my grandmother used to tell, the glowing sands were the tears of the ancient gods, appearing only when they had a message to send. That night, for the first time in years, a feeling other than fear and hatred began to stir within me. It was a single, terrifying question. Why me? The next morning, I did something I'd never dared to do. I walked into the heart of the settlement, to the great tent of Lord Valerius, the oldest and most powerful of the remaining chieftains. He was a hard, practical man, his face a roadmap of old battle scars. He had been my father's most vocal critic. I told him about the glowing sand. He looked at me not with contempt, but with a cold, clinical pity. "Kyle," he said, his voice flat, "desperation can make a man see things that aren't there. Our people need warriors and strategy, not fairy tales about glowing sand. Go home, boy, do not peddle false hope." His words should have crushed me, but this time, something inside me snapped, a spark of defiance. "Then give me a chance," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "Give me a chance to prove it isn't false." Valerius let out a short, humorless laugh. "A chance? With what? The broken men who follow you? The skinny farmers and the craftsmen who know how to hold a hammer but not a sword?" He gestured to the small crowd that had gathered behind me, the outcasts, the forgotten, the only ones who had listened to my story. "Fine," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You want a chance? Take your followers to the Gorge of Whispers. If you can survive the night in there, no fire, no weapons, only the water on your backs, I will reconsider. But be warned, Kyle, that is a place where even the wolves fear to tread." It wasn't a chance. It was a death sentence. The gorge was infamous for its bone-chilling winds that sounded like the shrieks of the dead and the nocturnal predators that hunted in its shadows. But as I looked at the desperate faces behind me, I knew I had no choice. "We accept," I said, the words feeling like stones in my throat. As we prepared to leave, a rider, exhausted and covered in dust, brought news from our spies in the east. It was a message meant only for the chieftain's ears, but it found its way to me. It was a blow more terrible than Valerius's challenge. The Sand Reavers were amassing for the largest raid in a generation, and the man leading them, the warlord they called the Desert's Hammer for his brutality, was Malachor. Malachor, my brother, the brother my father had sent away as a child hostage 10 years ago in a failed peace treaty. We all thought he was dead, but he had survived. He had been raised by our enemies, forged in their cruelty, and now he was coming home to burn it all to the ground. My war, if it ever began, would not just be for my people. It would be against my own blood. My heart fractured. The Gorge of Whispers was no longer the greatest trial I faced. The greatest trial was waiting for me in the east, and it wore my brother's face. We entered the gorge as the sun bled across the horizon. The wind began to howl, a mournful, terrifying sound. The 1,000 souls with me shivered, huddled together. This wasn't a test of endurance. This was a test of faith. I climbed a high ledge. "Listen to me," I roared over the wind. "Valerius expects us to die. He expects us to panic and turn on each other. But tonight we will show him what we are made of." I gave them a simple, brutal command. Spread out! Each of you find shelter alone. Face the darkness by yourself. Anyone who cannot endure it is free to leave, but those who remain at dawn, you will be the new army of the plains. It went against every survival instinct. Many protested, calling me a madman. Nearly half of them turned and fled back to the hollow safety of the settlement. The rest hesitated, but I saw something in their eyes. They were tired of living in fear. That night was the longest of my life. I heard the howl of beasts, the clatter of falling rocks, but I did not move. I thought of Lyra. I thought of Malachor. When the first rays of dawn pierced the darkness, I stood up. All across the gorge, from crevices and caves, others began to stand. They were dirty, exhausted, but they were standing. I counted 300. From 1,000, only 300 remained. But when I looked into their eyes, I saw no more fear. I saw steel. This was my army, the 300. But how could we face tens of thousands of sand reavers? How could I face my brother? The night before we were to march, despair washed over me again. Who was I to carry the fate of a people? I was just Kael, the traitor's son. I needed an assurance. I walked alone to the sacred fire our new army had lit, a single flame of hope in the vast darkness. I fell to my knees, looked up at the star-dusted sky, and in a moment of ultimate weakness, I uttered the vow that would come to haunt my every waking moment. Great Spirit, soul of this land, whoever is listening, I whispered, my voice raw, if you have truly chosen me, if you grant us victory over the sand reavers, I make this unbreakable vow. When I return in triumph, the first living thing, the first soul to walk through the door of my home to greet me, I will consecrate it to this flame. I will offer that life, a holy sacrifice, for the rebirth of our people. The words hung in the sudden still air. The fire roared, then settled. A terrible peace fell over me. I had my assurance, but I had just made a bargain with fate, and I had no idea what the price would be. Our plan was not one of strength, but of deception. We would not fight the sand reavers. We would make them fight themselves. We knew they would camp in the Valley of Thorns, a natural basin surrounded by high cliffs, a perfect trap. That night, the darkness was absolute. My 300, each armed with a ram's horn, an empty clay jar, and an unlit torch, split into 3 groups, silently scaling the cliffs to surround the valley. We waited for the third watch, the deepest point of the night, when sleep is heaviest and vigilance is at its weakest. I stood with 100 men on the northern ridge, looking down at the sea of campfires below. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I took a deep breath and gave the signal. And then we unleashed hell. At once, 300 horns blasted an unholy shriek that echoed and multiplied off the canyon walls. A moment later, 300 clay jars were smashed against the rocks, creating a deafening crash, like the clang of 10,000 swords. And finally, 300 torches were lit simultaneously, transforming the dark cliffs into a moving, dancing ring of fire, creating the illusion of a vast army pouring down from all sides. The reaction in the valley was instantaneous chaos. The sleeping sand reavers awoke to a nightmare of sound and fury. Seeing no clear enemy, only shadows and fire, they believed they were besieged by a demon army. They grabbed their weapons and attacked anything that moved. Brother cut down brother. Chariots crashed into one another in the dark. The screams of pain and terror were music to our ears. We had turned their own savagery against them. We had weaponized their fear. But my own battle was yet to come. Amid the pandemonium, I saw a single contingent of warriors holding their formation, led by a figure on a chariot adorned with skulls. Malachor. He knew it was a trick. His eyes scanned the cliffs, searching for the architect of this chaos. I took a small band of my best warriors and descended into the valley, not to join the slaughter, but to confront my past. We met amidst the fire and screaming. I stood before his chariot. He leaped down, his cruel scimitar in hand. He had changed. He was taller, broader, a jagged scar running down one side of his face, but the eyes, I still recognized his eyes. They were now as cold and hard as the desert stone. "Kyle," he snarled, "my pathetic little brother, you've learned some cheap tricks." "Malachor," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "Come home, this isn't your fight." He laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Home? This place abandoned me. Father threw me to the wolves to save his own skin. The sand reavers gave me a home. They taught me that strength is the only truth. You still cling to your weak faith, your useless prayers." "It's not weakness," I yelled. "It's hope." "Hope doesn't fill an empty stomach, Kale," he charged. Our duel was a clash of worlds. His blade was all power and rage. Mine was all speed and desperation. As we fought, we traded more than blows. He spoke of his years of torment, of having to kill to survive. I tried to speak of our childhood, of flying kites by the Aryan River. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Doubt, maybe memory. It was all I needed. I didn't aim for his heart. I slammed the pommel of my sword against his temple. He staggered and fell. The battle was over by dawn. The valley was a silent, smoking graveyard. We had won an impossible victory. The 300 were all alive. I stood over my brother's unconscious form, the thrill of victory turning to ash in my mouth. I had defeated the enemy, but my true war was just beginning. The journey home was a blur of triumph. Word of our victory spread like wildfire. People poured out from the settlements, cheering, throwing flowers. They no longer called me Orin's Folly. They called me Savior, the torch in the night. Even Lord Valerius greeted me with the look of undisguised awe. I rode through the adoring crowds, but my mind was a dark, cold place. The vow, it echoed in my head louder than the cheering. The first living thing, the first soul to walk through the door of my home. My heart hammered with a new kind of terror. I spurred my horse on, desperate to get home, to the silence of my empty house. But as our small dwelling came into view, I knew it was too late. The wooden door flew open. A small figure dressed in her finest clothes, a wreath of wildflowers in her hair, came running out. Her smile was as bright as the sun. "Kale, you're home!" It was Lyra. My world stopped. The sound of the crowd faded to a dull roar, then to a deafening silence. I saw her eyes shining with pure joy and pride. She was running toward me, oblivious that each step was bringing her closer to a sacrificial pyre I had built with my own words. I slid from my horse, my legs threatening to buckle. She threw her arms around me. I could feel her small heart beating with excitement against my chest. My own heart felt like it had stopped. It had shattered into a million pieces of ice. The crowd, sensing the shift, grew quiet. The celebration turned to confusion, then to a tense, horrified understanding. All eyes were on me. Then Lord Valerius's voice, cold and hard as steel, cut through the silence. "Kyle, a vow made to the gods is unbreakable." His face was grim. "You saved us. Now show your devotion. Fulfill your promise." His words were the final turn of the knife. The pressure from 1,000 pairs of eyes, from the weight of tradition, from the iron grip of my own vow was crushing me. I looked down at Lyra. She was still smiling up at me, waiting. What could I do? Kill the only light in my life to keep my honor, or break my vow, become an oath-breaker in the eyes of my people, and perhaps invite a wrath far worse than the sand reavers? In that moment, I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. I took Lyra's hand. It was small and warm in mine. Without a word, I began to walk, leading her through the parting crowd. I knew what they thought. I was leading her to the great ceremonial pyre in the center of the square. Every step was agony. I could hear women sobbing. I saw pity in their eyes. but no one moved to stop me. A vow was a vow. "Kale, what is it?" Lyra whispered, her hand tightening in mine. "Why is everyone so quiet?" I couldn't speak. My throat was a knot of unshed tears. We reached the pyre. The ceremonial flames danced, licking at the air, waiting. Lord Valerius and the other chieftains formed a solemn circle. They were the witnesses. I turned and knelt before Lyra, bringing my face level with hers. Her eyes, now wide with confusion and fear, searched mine. "Kyle, you're scaring me." I placed my hands on her small shoulders. I looked deep into her eyes, and for a moment, the world fell away. There was no crowd, no pyre, no vow. There was only the unconditional love of a brother for his sister. And in that moment of pure connection, a thought clear as a ringing bell pierced through my despair. A third path. I took a deep breath and turned to the crowd. My voice, when it came, was no longer shaking. It was clear and strong. "Yes, I made a vow," I declared. "I promised to consecrate the first soul who greeted me to this flame, and I am a man of my word." A gasp of horror rippled through the square. Lyra trembled. "But you," I continued, my voice hardening, "you have listened with the ears of fear and blind tradition. You think consecrate means kill. You believe our gods are as bloodthirsty as the sand reavers. You are wrong." I turned back to Lyra, and a genuine smile touched my lips. "Today, I consecrate my sister, Lyra, not to death, but to life. My vow was not a blood curse, it was a promise of rebirth. Her old life, that of a little girl living in the shadows, ends here, so that a new life can begin. She will be the first high priestess of our new temple. She will no longer be just my sister. She will be a living torch, a symbol of hope, a voice for our future." A stunned silence fell over the square. They stared at me, then at Lyra, their minds struggling to process my words. I hadn't broken the vow. I had redefined it. I had transformed an act of destruction into one of creation. Lord Valerius was the first to react. He stared at me for a long moment, and then a slow, true smile spread across his weathered face. He stepped forward, and instead of drawing a blade, he bowed his head to Lyra. "We welcome our high priestess." And then, like a dam breaking, the square erupted. But this time the cheers were not just for a military victory. They were cheers of relief, of reverence, of the dawn of a new age. On that day in the shattered plains, we had defeated more than an enemy army. We had defeated our own demons. Years passed. The shattered plains became the verdant plains. Working together, we irrigated the land, turning the dust to fields of green. The laughter of children replaced the mournful howl of the wind. I never took the title of king. I was simply Kyle, a voice on the council. The spiritual leadership of our people fell to Lyra. She grew into a wise, compassionate, and powerful woman, her counsel guiding us through every hardship. She was the living embodiment of the hope I had so desperately prayed for. And Malachor, he was not executed. After years of quiet reflection, healed by time and by the unwavering compassion of Lyra, he found a different kind of strength. He was given command of the border guard, using his knowledge of the desert to protect the people he once sought to destroy. He and I never regained the easy brotherhood of our childhood, but we found a new peace, a respect forged in the ruins of our past. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I still climb that rocky bluff. But now, when I look to the east, I no longer see a threat. I see a horizon open and full of promise. They call me a hero, but the truth is I was just a brother who was so terrified of losing his sister that he found a way to bend the will of the gods themselves. My greatest victory wasn't on the battlefield. It was in that moment before the fire when I realized that a true legacy isn't written in blood, but is built piece by piece with love. And in our once shattered land, we finally learned how to heal, not with swords, but by choosing hope again and again. My story is over. Thank you for listening to this confession. If it resonated with you, if it made you think, then that is all I could ever ask for. There are so many more stories like this one, tales of struggle, loss, and redemption, right here on our channel. If you'd like to continue taking these emotional journeys with us, I hope you'll consider hitting that subscribe button. That way, you're not just supporting our work, you're becoming part of a community where we explore the deepest corners of the human heart together. Thank you, and I'll see you again soon.